Over the past 2 weeks, I've rewatched all 22 LCS finals, and I've taken more notes on these than I did for any class in high school or college. So I feel pretty qualified to rank all of the LCS finals winners on a scale from GOAT, which is the best final I've ever seen, down to Wake Me Up, which means I wish I hadn't watched it when it happened, and I wish I hadn't rewatched it over the past 2 weeks. So the very first split of the LCS was won by TSM, made up of Dyrus, the Odd One, Reginald, Wild Turtle, and Xpecial. And I feel like this win was more about TSM's legacy than it was about just this individual finals, because all five players went on to have huge legacies. Even Xpecial and the Odd One, who never had success on another team, were just big names in the scene. And Dyrus was huge for years. Reginald has had much more attention as an owner than as a player, but he's been a name forever. And Wild Turtle has played more games than almost anybody in the LCS. So huge names, huge legacy, and a very well deserved win. I think they were just the best team going into the creation of the LCS, and they won the first split for good reason. To the point that it was a little bit embarrassing when Good Game University took them to 5 games. I just think that with how large the gap was between the teams, I'm surprised TSM didn't win in 3 or 4 games. The major downsides of that finals were that there was very little hype in the LCS at the time. It was the first split, but the crowd's not going crazy. The casters are kind of excited, but not the same level of hype that we've seen since then. And when they win, just like a little confetti falls on them. And Dyrus stands up and throws up 2 peace signs, and the rest of his team is like unplugging their keyboards, and it doesn't really look like they just won the LCS. And the much bigger downside of this finals was the whole environment felt so unprofessional, but in a mean way. I hated the way that Reggie talked to his teammates. I hated those videos where he's like yelling at Wild Turtle and Xpecial's trying to back up Turtle, or he's yelling at Dyrus. Just it seemed incredibly toxic. It was probably the most clear case of bullying that I've seen. And I know that we only see like the occasional YouTube video from back then, but it felt gross to me and I hated seeing that. 2013 summer was almost the opposite of that. So 2013 summer was won by Cloud9, made up of Balls, Meteos, High, Sneaky, and Lemon Nation. And it felt like they were the new kids. It felt really fun. And it was still unprofessional, but it was in a good way. Like they were all best friends and they were all goofing around. And then they speed ran playoffs. They didn't lose a single game. They looked like, I would say, with the foresight of having seen the finals after that, that they were probably the best North American team out of at least the first 5 splits, maybe more, depending on how you rank them against 2015 Summer CLG. And we started seeing cool personalities beyond just like funny house moments, like Dyrus setting the house on fire. Um, they seemed like friends. I loved it. I loved that Lemon was basically a coach. Lemon's notebook was not just a meme, it was really interesting because it didn't feel like they were just reacting to the draft. It felt like they had planned a ton of stuff out. And this was the first team for me that had in LCS. I know if you go to other regions, there were a million people like this, but they had unique picks that felt like it was that team's pick. And I'm not talking like Reginald Twisted Fate blue card. I'm talking like Zyra and Ash, where I see Zyra Ash 8 years later or 10 years later, and I think, huh, that's just like Cloud9. And the final still lacks some hype, but I think that improved with each season. So I would give TSM a fine, mostly for their legacy. And then I'm going to give Cloud9 a great because it was a much more fun finals. I really liked the team. I love the players. 2014 spring was won by the same team, exact same roster. So I have a lot less to say about it. They made it look really easy. Again, they crushed playoffs. It never felt like there was any doubt that they were going to win. It was fun to watch the team, but I'm just going to knock them down a tier because it's less interesting when the same roster, same team wins again. And then 2014 summer is a much better iteration of TSM, in my opinion. It was made up by Dyrus, Amazing, Bjergsen, Wild Turtle, and Lust Boy, and I felt like there were much better personalities on this team. There was a lot of hype around Bjergsen coming in to replace Reggie earlier in the year, and he delivered on it. He was great. He at the time was the future greatest of all time. Looking back now, he is the GOAT of mid lane in North America. And even new additions like Lust Boy, he didn't last long on TSM compared to some other more long lasting players, but he had this huge amount of style. He kind of had this swagger that not a lot of players had at the time. And for me, this would be peak Wild Turtle. I'm sure you could argue that Wild Turtle was better mechanically in like 2017 than 2014. But in 2014, Turtle felt like he might be the best AD carry in North America. And there weren't a lot of other times when I could say that about him. And this win just felt more earned. Like the team had to improve. They had to rise to Cloud9's level. In 2013, before Cloud9 came along, TSM just was the best team. So it didn't feel like they had to fight for the win. It felt like other people had to dethrone TSM. And now TSM came back in 2014 summer and they reclaimed the crown. And it was a lot more fun to watch. It was pretty hype finals. And it was the first out of the first four splits where the teams felt evenly matched. I didn't go into the finals thinking, okay, well, 90% chance this team wins. I felt like, okay, TSM's really coming for Cloud9. This might be it. So I would put that one in the good tier. 2015 spring isn't quite a run back of the same TSM roster, but it's still Dyrus, Bjergsen, Wild Turtle, and Lustboy. They just replaced Amazing with Santorin. And it's still a little bit boring to have the same team again, especially because it's the fourth straight finals where it's Cloud9 versus TSM, and it just got old. There weren't as many memorable moments from this finals, and between that and the repeat of everything, I'm going to knock it down to fine. But 2015 summer, CLG's first ever win, Zion Spartan, now known as Darshan, Xmithy, Poe Belter, Doublelift, and Afromoo. This is my favorite finals of all time. It was just the most hype going into this of any finals. Incredible venue at Madison Square Garden. This win meant vindication for Doublelift. It was the culmination of so many splits of Rush Hour. It was the end of CLG's struggles. It was the end of Doublelift's empty trophy case. It killed a lot of memes. It had Doublelift's pentakill, and it has probably the greatest quote of all time as well. The faithful shall be rewarded from Kobe when they're finally winning their first finals. It just felt amazing. And I think that this one had almost as much long lasting impact as the very first finals, not just because CLG was finally a champion, Doublelift was finally a champion, but more stories have come out of this team than any other that I've seen. And I've laughed more at stories from this crazy team than any other roster. It's this episode of Trash Talk from Doublelift where he has all of the old CLG members back on. And if you ask me like my top 10 favorite league stories, probably like 6 come just from that 1 hour Trash Talk episode. Maybe my favorite is everything about Coach Chris telling them this really dumb stuff to do. But like Turtle walks into the bathroom and sees Darshan and probably says like, hey, or something. And Darshan just stares him down, doesn't say anything. And when Darshan's telling this, Doublelift cracks up because he's saying that that's Coach Chris. They just sounded like such a dysfunctional team. They It was such an unhealthy environment. And I know I trashed TSM earlier for having an unhealthy environment, but like CLG was pushed to the absolute limit mentally, and the fact that they won is incredible. I I'm kind of happy that team broke up because it seemed like such an abusive environment that needed change. But that was the best finals of all time. It goes in the GOAT category. And it would take a lot for another finals to beat that one for me. 2016 was a pretty cool year. It had probably the most important roster swaps that had happened in the first 4 years of league. And this finals was fantastic. CLG won again. They did it with Darshan, Xmithy, Huhi, Stixay, and Aframu. So 3 of the same players swap out the carries. And it's got another great quote. You can change the players, but the faith remains. I got goosebumps hearing that the first time. I got goosebumps hearing it last week when I rewatched this finals. Doublelift going to TSM was like Lex Luthor joining the Justice League. It didn't make sense. There was all of this hate between the two teams. And then Doublelift goes to TSM, and CLG has this rookie AD carry, and somehow they made it work. 2015 summer and 2016 spring felt like the start of an era where whichever AD carry makes the bigger play wins the finals. Doublelift had his Jinx pentakill. He played out of his mind in 2015 summer. But then in 2016 spring finals, Stixay just went nuts. That game 5 Tristana, I will remember forever as like one of the top 5 AD carry plays from North America. I don't want to discredit other regions, but it was incredible. I loved watching it. My only drawback here is that going into 2016, it felt like one more step towards LCS being more about money and less about the players or the fans. And a lot of the roster changes, in some weird way, felt more corporate to me. It felt like it wasn't about who the team was, what defined the team. It felt like it was about it wasn't even about like how do we win. It was like how do we get the most bang for our buck, which makes sense. They are corporations. They do exist to make money, but it just felt like a step away from like whimsical fun of the LCS. Anyway, Stixay was amazing. This whole team, Kobe said it best with you can change the players, but the faith remains. And I would put this in the great tier. 2016 summer was won by TSM with a squad of Hanser, Svenskeren, Bjergsen, Doublelift, and Biofrost. And this is my all-time favorite TSM squad. They more or less played together for 3 straight splits, and I love this squad. All of these players were great for years, and the most important thing for me here is more so than any team except for maybe early Cloud9, this team just played great together. Mechanically, I'd say Bjergsen and Doublelift, maybe Svenskeren were all top mechanically in their role. Hanser and Biofrost definitely weren't, but they knew how to play so well with TSM, and that's what made TSM great to me. We do continue the AD carry pop-off pattern here with Doublelift making one of the all-time best LCS plays on Lucian in Game 4. And to take something from CLG, TSM just gave me faith here. I truly believed that this was the year that TSM would succeed at Worlds. I thought they were so good. They played so well together. They team fought really well. And we'll just blame it on the Worlds draw, I guess, for no success at Worlds. I would put that finals in the great tier. 2017 spring was won by TSM. It was the same roster except put in Wild Turtle instead of Doublelift. It was a little bit of a repeat, and it felt a lot more boring without Doublelift. I'd say the best thing about this finals was the crowd. The crowd was so hyped, probably the most hyped since Madison Square Garden. But this one, it wasn't really memorable to me. Maybe I'm a little bit of a Doublelift fanboy. Okay, I definitely am a Doublelift fanboy. He's my favorite player. But it was just a little bit more boring to me, and it was a repeat. So I'm going to knock it all the way down to fine. 2017 summer, also won by TSM for the first three-peat in LCS history. Same roster again, but Doublelift's back in. And this one gets a lot more points. Sorry, Wild Turtle. I also think Turtle's a great player, but I love the teamwork in this finals. They were so good at team fighting, even when they lost lane. In Game 4, they came back from a 10,000 gold deficit to still win back-to-back team fights and close it out. So I was just so impressed, not by their individual skill, but by their team fighting ability and how well they work together. And I would consider this the final time that Bjergsen and Doublelift were both in peak form and on the same team. They played together later in 2020 and then again on 100 Thieves in spring of 2023, but it just felt like neither was in their best shape at the same time. I'd say in 2020, Doublelift wasn't playing his best, and Bjergsen had to carry that TSM. And then post retirement, they've both been a little bit shakier. Doublelift has looked pretty good on 100 Thieves, but Bjergsen just didn't have his best season. So 2017 summer holds a special place for being the last time that I thought Bjergsen and Doublelift were really at their best. And I put this finals in good. If TSM wasn't taking the three-peat there, this finals probably would have been great. 2018 spring marked Team Liquid finally ending their curse and getting their first trophy. The roster was Impact, Xmithity, Pobelter, Doublelift, and Ole. And a couple important things to note about this. This was the first split of franchising. I really loved 100 Thieves in this split. I got the 100 Thieves shirt. They're still my favorite team. And an interesting thing about this was that four of these players were in the finals of the previous split. Obviously, Doublelift won the previous split on TSM, but Xmithy, Pobelter, and Ole were all on Immortals and lost that finals. And also, Xmithy, Pobelter, and Doublelift had all played together on that MSG CLG team. So throw in Impact and then a lot of these players who have major history with each other. So at this point in the LCS as a whole, everybody has history. Aside from these new teams, like the old teams have a ton of history. Even the new teams have players with a ton of history. I feel like I've seen most of these players for over 5 years. And for that reason and just the video production, this has the best hype video ever for finals. It shows like really old tournaments where just a bunch of people happen to be there. Like Ryu's there, Meteos, obviously all like Doublelift, Xmithy. But it's an incredible video. It's so cool to see all of these guys like 6 years prior, some of them even before LCS existed at these major tournaments. And this is actually the finals that I watched first. And after watching this finals, I thought I should just watch all of the finals because this was such a good finals. If it hadn't been a stomp, a 3-0, it might have been a goated finals. But since it was a 3-0, since it wasn't close, I'm gonna put this in the great tier. And then 2018 summer, exact same roster, still fun. Team had a lot more confidence. It seemed like they knew they were going to win. Doublelift continued his summer split immortality, and it was a good finals. It'll go in good. It loses a point for being a repeat. 2019 spring gave Team Liquid the three-peat with the same roster, but Jensen in mid and Core JJ in support. Honestly, I didn't really know who Core JJ was. I had seen him on Dignitas, and then he wins Worlds, and then it comes to North America. I'm like, oh, that is the same guy who played on Dignitas. The major things for me for this final was Jensen got his first title. I was really happy for him, and I love the way that the team pushed him to take the trophy first. It was a great moment. But on the flip side, it felt a lot more like it was paid by Steve. It felt like he was getting the most expensive guy for each position that he could. I mean, maybe Jensen wasn't as expensive as Bjergsen, but it was clearly a super expensive roster. It felt like he was buying the win, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's what teams are supposed to do. But there was a little bit less like camaraderie there. It was still great personalities, but I actually think that TSM had even bigger personalities. And my favorite moment from this was not in the game. It was when they're all lining up for the opening ceremony and Sven starts looking for Jensen. I can't believe Jensen just stood there and took that. Like there's nothing else he can do, but wow, that was an insult. And probably a highlight of the actual finals for me was no Quicksilver Sash when Sven gets Skarner impaled. It was crazy. It was kind of weird that this finals was a comeback victory, considering it was a three-peat. Like, Team Liquid is absolutely the favorite to beat, and yet they had to make the comeback in this series. Even in Game 5, they're way down. I think it's over. And then a series of unfortunate plays from TSM leads Team Liquid to getting the three-peat. So I'm going to put this in great. I know that the same team winning 3 times in a row can be boring, but there were a lot of good things to this finals. For 2019 summer, I'm going to put, spoiler, I usually say the tier at the end. I'm going to put this one in good. It's down a tier for the four-peat. And I really wanted C9 to end their drought. Even at the time, I didn't know it was going to be Sneaky's final season, but I just felt like, wow, Sneaky was here on the final stage last year. He's been on the final stage so many times since 2014 spring, and he hasn't won. I wanted him to win, and I felt kind of sad that he didn't, and I felt like Team Liquid had won enough. So this made them the first ever team to get the four-peat. Doublelift in the hype video said, like, if we do it, I think we'll be the only team to ever do it. And I agree with him. I certainly don't think Energy is about to win 3 more splits in a row. And I don't think any team's going to four-peat again. So congrats to Team Liquid for sure. But I felt like a lot of other rosters had cooler things going on. And it was just a little bit boring to see Team Liquid win again. 2020 spring was won by Cloud9 with a roster of Licorice, Blabber, Niski, Sven, and Vulcan. And if this hadn't been a COVID year, the things I would focus on are that Cloud9 dropped its longest players, like Sneaky, who had been on Cloud9 longer than any LCS player had been on any LCS team, or Svenskeren, who had just won the MVP for the previous split. I think that once the last of the OGs left, like it just stopped feeling like Cloud9 to me. When Balls and Lemonation left pretty early, I still felt like, okay, it's still mostly Cloud9. Like Meteos is in and out, High is in and out, Sneaky's here holding down the fort. It still felt like Cloud9. With Sneaky gone, it just felt like Team Liquid 2.0 to me. Unfortunately, since it was COVID, my main focus was not on the roster or the storylines. My main focus was on how COVID ruined everything. There was zero hype at the finals. The casters sound so awkward with no crowd. I didn't like the face cams or the fact that they aren't on stage. I didn't need to see every player's unmade bed and their overflowing laundry hampers. COVID ruined everything. And for that and that alone, this goes in the wake me up tier. I wish I hadn't watched it then. I wish I didn't rewatch it now. And 2020 summer was won by TSM with Broken Blade, Spica, Bjergsen, Doublelift, and Biofrost. This is almost back to the 2017 roster. It's got the core of the mid and bot with a new jungler in Spica and Broken Blade and a top lane in Broken Blade. So something interesting here is that Doublelift won his 6th straight summer, but he really wasn't looking his best, as I said earlier. Bjergsen was still looking great. I really wanted FlyQuest to win here. They didn't earn it, or else they would have won. But it felt a little anticlimactic. I was really rooting for Fly after their back-to-back finals. I wanted them to win. I found that the quality of play was pretty low from both sides. And for me, the most memorable play was probably Ignar alting backwards on Pantheon, like just alting into his own tower, accomplishing nothing, and Wild Turtle immediately DCing. It was hilarious. And above all, I just hate what COVID did here. It was so frustrating. A second finals with no crowd, with them playing in their homes, was really disappointing. So this one also goes in the wake me up tier. Another thing that made me a little bit sad about this team, Broken Blade, Speak of Bjerg, Double, and Bio, was when they're getting interviewed, getting ready for Worlds. Spica and Broken Blade are so excited to play at Worlds. They really think they're going to do great. And then mostly Bjergsen and Doublelift, a little bit Biofrost are like, it's not going to go the way that you think it is. And I know that they've faced a complete lack of success at Worlds, but it just made me a little bit sad that the young guys are so excited and the veterans are so jaded. I know it makes sense, but it still hurt a little to watch. So 2021 spring was won by C9 with a team of Fudge, Blabber, Perks, Sven, and Vulcan. And we're back on stage here, but there's still no crowd. So the casters going hard just seems way less hype. There's no reaction to it. So it falls a little bit flat. And there are some hilarious moments from this finals, like Alfari gets first blooded all 5 games. In game 5, Cloud9 has this really unique level 1, and they get Alfari again, and even the casters are laughing. But going into 2021, with all of the roster swaps and the major retirements like Bjergsen and Doublelift, this season just felt super disconnected from the 2020 LCS. Like, there are so many EU imports, there are so many roster shakeups, and I know that that happens every year, but 2020 to 2021 might have been the biggest shakeups. And it just made it feel like there was no cohesion from the previous split to this split. So I would rank this one as fine, partly for the lack of cohesion and partly for the lack of a crowd. 2021 summer was won by 100 Thieves with a roster of Someday, Closer, Abadage, FBI, and Huhi. And this was the first new team to win after 6 splits. So that was the longest drought of not having a new winner. Of course, in the early LCS, there has to be a new winner in the first split. And then if anybody but them wins in the second split, that's a guaranteed new winner. So yeah, new winners were more frequent almost by default back then. But it was just cool to see the 4 major orgs didn't win, a new org won. I mean, 100 Thieves was in the finals in their very first split, and it took 6 splits for them to get a win, which isn't like crazy long or anything, but it was a journey, and it made me much more happy to see them win. This one also felt more cohesive because Someday had been on 100 Thieves for many splits. He was one of the original players, and there's somewhat of a continued squad taken from Golden Guardians with Closer, FBI, and Huhi. I know Demonte made it onto 100 Thieves and then got replaced by Abadage, but it felt like it was more continuous. It felt like there were storylines to follow. I was happy with that. And it brought us into this new era where it felt like anybody could win. I love 100 Thieves. I'm really happy they won. But when I was looking at this felt like the one opportunity for a series to challenge MSG as the GOAT finals of all time. That's redundant. My bad. The greatest of all time If EG had won the split, which would have required at least 2 series to go differently, that might have been the GOAT finals for me. That whole Danny play, and I know it was against 100 Thieves, but that Danny play with Tristana was incredible. It was one of the most exciting things I'd seen. And then they just lost that series. So that's an addendum that if EG had somehow won there, it might have been the GOAT series for me. But I would still put this series in great. I was really happy for 100 Thieves, and it had a lot of good things going for it. 2022 spring was won by Evil Geniuses with a roster of Impact, Inspired, Jojo, Pyun, Danny, and Vulcan. And aside from it being the fastest finals ever, it was really great to have a new champion again. I felt like in some ways 100 Thieves paved the way for this. Not like Evil Geniuses couldn't have won if 100 Thieves hadn't won before, but it just was a reminder that any team can win. And we definitely see that later on. But I liked that they were back-to-back new champions. Danny played out of his mind. And above all, I loved the mix of veteran players with newer players. It felt a lot like 2020 TSM, where you have the younger players and the ones who have been in LCS or in the pro scene forever. Like Impact, one of the most established players in the LCS, former world champion, Inspired, tons of great experience. Vulcan, sort of in the middle for experience back in 2022 spring, but had still played in the finals before, was a great guy. And then Jojo and Danny, 17, 18 years old, in high school, insane mechanically, but really benefited from having veterans and great leadership. So everything since then has been kind of sad with the Evil Geniuses news and Danny's mental health. I feel really bad for him. I thought he was one of the best additions to the LCS. And I mean, I hope he's doing well with whatever he's doing. I don't think he has any desire to come back to the LCS, but I'd be happy to see him again. Overall, I'd say this finals was great. If Danny, I feel like if Danny and JoJo debuted in the same split and they won that split, it would have been a contender for GOAT. Or, as I said previously, if they had won the prior year, also maybe GOAT. 2022 summer was won by Cloud9 with a roster of Fudge, Blabber, Jensen, Berserker, and Sven. Berserker was nuts, as many 80 carries who win finals are. Uh, and I'd say this was the most impactful split for how I felt about Sven. So I wasn't a big fan of Sven before he role swapped. I felt like he was really, really cocky, and he came over from Europe thinking like he was just gonna smack everybody around, and then he didn't. And I thought that was funny because I thought he had too much ego. But then in this split, his willingness to switch to support and him saying he was switching to support because he knew Berserker was better and he knew that if he wanted to win, he just had to do the switch. It made me respect him so much. I thought that was such a cool move. And then once I took off whatever glasses I had on that were like, I hate Sven, I realized this guy is awesome. His ability to explain why something is the right move is just unrivaled. Like, there are players who have better mechanics than he does, but when he would get up on whatever that high hosted segment was, like, not play by play, but something like that, or like Ask Pros, whatever it was, and Sven's just talking about what he's doing, I think he's a genius. And it made me respect him so much. I was actually finally happy to see him win. And on top of that, I was happy to see Jensen get a trophy with Cloud9 because he had had all those splits on Cloud9, never won with them, went and won with Team Liquid, and then he returned home for a victory with Cloud9. And that felt great. One thing taking away from this finals is they just had the best players in every role. Like, all of them were probably top 2, top 3 in their role, if not the best, which several of them were. And they lacked competition. Like, some of their biggest rivals weren't in the league anymore, and it felt like a free win. So I would put that finals in good. That brings us to this year. 2023 spring was won by Cloud9 again with Fudge, Blabber, M&S, Berserker, and Sven. So pretty much the same roster, but swap out the mid lane. And it suffered from the same thing that 2022 summer suffered from, which was it felt like there wasn't a lot of competition. Like, 100 Thieves had one of the more hyped rosters with Doublelift and Bjergsen joining up again on 100 Thieves, and they just didn't live up to the hype. There was like FlyQuest started off the split great, and then they just kind of fizzled. And somehow Golden Guardians made it to the finals, and I was totally rooting for them. Loved to root for an underdog. But in 11 years of LCS, Golden Guardians going into the finals against Cloud9 was just the most lopsided matchup. Like, I don't see how anybody could predict Golden Guardians to win. It was probably the most lopsided matchup since TSM versus GGU. Like, there was no hope. So I wanted to believe, but it was just a stomp. It wasn't very interesting. And I'm going to knock them down as well for it being a repeat with mostly the same roster. At least when Team Liquid four-peated, it felt like they had competition every time. I was like, oh, can they beat TSM here? Can they beat Cloud9 here? But when C9 repeat wins, it's just like, where's the competition? Why is NA so dead? Which leading into so I would rank that as fine. But leading into 2023 summer, Energy winning with Dokla, Contracts, Palafox, FBI, and Ignar was so hype because it didn't seem like Cloud9 had competition. Like, maybe Team Liquid, and then Team Liquid didn't make finals. So this, I would say, was the biggest upset we've ever seen in an LCS finals. I can't think of anything that comes close. There's times where, sure, if the other team had won, it would have been a bigger upset. But like, the underdog didn't win in most of the finals we've seen in LCS. It was either the two teams were pretty close, or the team everybody expected to win won most of the time. So I'd say this was the biggest upset ever, which gives it a lot of hype. And all of these guys, like, you can pinpoint exactly where they've been for the past 5 years. They really earned it. All of them were at least in academy for the past 5 years. All of them played on kind of bottom tier teams. 3 of them came over from CLG together. So there's so much history there. And had this taken place in 2015, it would have given similar vibes to CLG getting their first win. I mean, it's literally CLG 2.0. I know I compare a lot of teams to, or a lot of finals to MSG, but that's because MSG for me was just the pinnacle of what a finals could look like. It was it, the peak of story coming together, of players getting what they deserve, of a giant crowd being as hyped as it gets, and the casters going crazy. So that's why I compare everything to MSG. I still don't know how Energy won, but it was hype. And after watching 22 finals, my three biggest factors for how good a series is, how happy I am for the finals winners, come down to the hype, the players, and the story behind it. So I would rank the most recent finals as great. That was a lot of talking. I had a ton of notes, and I think it was worth rewatching all the finals. It was really fun. It was cool seeing how things developed from split to split. It was like reading a history textbook, except with Kobe and Captain Flowers yelling at me for 3 hours straight every night. So, a lot of fun. And if you disagree with my rankings, which I think most people would, I don't see how we would possibly have the exact same rankings. Feel free to leave a comment.